So let's dig into Frontside a little bit. It looks like it's a consulting company that does a lot of open source. Can you tell us how you got into that and the types of open source projects you guys focus on?
Yeah, so we've been doing open source kind of throughout the history of Frontside, but Frontside started back in 2005. So this will be our 20th year in operation. And up until that point in my career, I had been working almost exclusively on the back end. And I started doing a lot of web apps and Rails apps. And one of the things I realized is so many of the architectural patterns that I had been using on the back end were directly applicable to the front end, and which was, at that time felt kind of like a little bit of a wild west, especially on the web. There's just, you've got uh, this very new thing called the dynamic HTML and JavaScript to control it, and hey, go have fun. And so the front side literally was literally, the word means taking those architectural patterns from the back end and applying them to the front side. And so that really was kind of the inception of the company. And since then, we've actually swung, I would say, a couple of times back to the back end and back to the front end, because that's just kind of the way things happen. It turns out that the architectural patterns that are developed in both of those contexts are almost always eventually applicable in the other. And so the things that we would learn on the front end, we end up taking the back end and vice versa. And so we've been going at it for about 20 years, and we've worked on a bunch of different open source stuff in that time. So originally, I think we were primarily in the Ruby community. So if you go into you'll find that we have a lot of gems. Probably our most popular one is the one that integrates with Stripe. We also did, as we were working on the front side, the original implementation of the JavaScript integration gem. So we actually took V8 and embedded it into Ruby so that inside of a Rails application, you could compile assets and evaluate JavaScript code all without leaving Ruby. And so that's kind of now that's a more independent project, but we were the ones who started that. We also were very involved in like the continuous integration and continuous delivery. That's always been very important to us, especially from the beginning. But being like primarily a front end consultancy at that time, we actually designed the artwork for the Jenkins project. If you've ever if you've ever heard of that. So we were very big into the Jenkins community, and we were actually brought and did the same thing. There's a lot of taking other runtimes and bringing them into other runtimes. We took Ruby, JRuby, and let you write Jenkins plugins inside Ruby. And if there's one kind of tying theme for the company, is that we believe very strongly that when development is done right, it feels like flying. There's no better feeling. You are commanding bits and bytes from great heights, and they're doing everything that you want almost effortlessly. And so that's what we're looking for in terms of a developer experience, whether you're on the front end or the back end. And so that's what we try and bring to our clients.
I thought it was pretty interesting, like going through your landing page where you were like directly offering developer experience, like consulting as a thing. When I think about a lot of traditional consultancies, I guess I think more agency, not having worked in this space where it's like a customer comes to you, is like, hey, I want to build this thing, et cetera, et cetera. But this is like, let me come in and speed up and just like improve the feel of your developer experience so that you can ship faster and have closer iteration cycles. So like, is that something that formed over time? Were you doing that in the beginning? Like, how did that come about?
I think that's something that formed over time. Originally, we were very much an agency. We were building web applications, first in Rails, then in JavaScript. We even did some Java and C++ for desktop applications. We were very much the model of, tell us what your problem is, and we will build you a product that solves that problem. But I think we started doing DX consulting about 7 or 8 years ago, because time and time again, when we're in especially very large companies that have very large development teams, we would see that so much money was being wasted on friction, like unnecessary friction. So you have these teams that are trying to essentially move a product down the road. And unless you've got wheels, unless you've got grease on the ball bearings, you're just going to be sitting there expending this massive effort to just go a few inches. And so the underlying problem wasn't really a missing tool. It wasn't really a missing application. It wasn't even a organizational structure like an agile team or something like that. It was really just, there's so much friction in your tooling. There's so much energy being lost in meaningless tasks. Let's focus on the developer experience, and then you can reclaim that money by having your developers being able to work without friction so that they can accomplish their task and it feels easy, it feels great. And that turns out that's a product.
Yeah, so reading through your website, it feels like where that has productized is into Backstage. Can you give us like a little overview of like what Backstage is and how it accelerates that development?
Yeah, so Backstage is a developer portal. It was originally developed at Spotify, and it is just a way for very, very large teams to share information, to share processes, to just not reinvent the wheel time and time and time again. So at the very kind of minimum installation of the product, it will crawl your GitHub organization and just make sure that every single person in the organization understands what kind of intellectual property exists throughout the organization, and then it inverts the control so that if you have a GitHub repo, all you have to do is check in a YAML file, and it will tell Backstage, this is my project, this is how you integrate it, and you can register your documentation so that you can have a single documentation site that's searchable, and so on and so forth. So, like you guys, mentioned meeting in through a GitHub repo, it's kind of this trying to establish a very similar thing for people in organizations, so that if you need something, you're much less likely to invent it on your own. Or if you need, say, documentation, you don't have to DM someone on Slack and say, "Hey, how do you do this?" You can just look, and it's there publicly. So all of that is part of removing that friction. So it's kind of I think it's an important piece in the toolkit, especially for very, very, very large. I mean, we're talking development teams over 500 people. You start to experience a lot of loss of people just not knowing that there's an off-the-shelf component that they can reuse that's right inside the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm surprised that Backstage has like blown up so much. Well, I'm not surprised as in like, oh, it's not good, but like I'm just surprised. Like it's a really cool thing. So when I was working at Artsy, I think that's when it came out, and we had this sort of similar problem. It was like, if you get a large enough organization and you have teams that are spinning up services, they like need to learn all the things that they need to learn to like spin up a service. And it was cool that Spotify had like open source this product where it's like, you need to spin up a service. Here's like a one-click feature. We'll show you the catalog of like kinds of services you can operate inside our organization. Yeah, I don't know. That's really cool.